What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news. And today, we have some roster moves to update, as well as Teddy Bridgewater's contract. Not the full details, but an idea of what he is going to be getting paid. I know a few people were asking about that. And finally, Barry Sanders is getting a statue, so let's get it started. Welcome everybody to my video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we are back with some Lions roster moves to hit on a day before their preseason opener against the New York Giants. I believe, yes, that is going to be a home game, and we will be live on this channel reacting to the game live. And then right after the game, we're going to have a post-game show on Bleacher Report. So if you guys want to see me twice, you can. You can see me live. You can see me right after the game if you guys want to tune into that. But I just wanted to give that little announcement. We usually use preseason as kind of like, okay, we're figuring out how we're going to do things for the season, but it's also a good time because it starts the beginning really for a lot of people that weren't able to see training camp the first time seeing a lot of this competition. We have some roster moves to announce. We have some players that are no longer with the Lions, one to a retiring, which was a little bit surprising, at least for me today. The other one was waived, and then we have some new additions to the Lions roster, and then we'll touch on the Teddy Bridgewater thing and the Barry Sanders thing to wrap it all up. But let's start with the roster moves first. First off, we have Logan Stenberg, who has been waived by the Detroit Lions, the offensive guard, a former 4th-round pick back in 2020 out of Kentucky. All right, we're talking about Mr. Nasty. We're talking about the run-blocking mauler. And we had a lot of success on the offensive lineman. I mean, we had a pretty good amount of success in terms of offensive linemen drafted in that era with Bob Quinn. But unfortunately, this one just never really clicked for the Lions. Now, yes, he had to go through pretty quickly a schematic change. You know, you went from 2020, where it was the final season for Matt Patricia, right into Dan Campbell. So he had to kind of deal with that, which meant that this was the final year of his contract. And if you look at him being waived, it will probably save the Lions a little bit of money because of $1 million in cap savings, $185K that's going to go to dead cap because he's on his rookie contract. Although we won't necessarily save that $1 million because they take the top 53, and he was in the top 53, but someone else's contract will just get into the top 53. So we may save a little bit, but this isn't really much of a money save for the Detroit Lions. It's more so that we're going to have to continue to cut down, but at the same time, we have new players coming onto the roster, like Teddy Bridgewater, okay, who was announced today. Also, like some new additions with one player retiring. So we're getting different looks at different guys. Now, for Logan Stenberg, what I can tell you that I saw specifically in this year's training camp that stuck out is he seemingly was at the bottom of the depth chart when he was getting snaps. Look at their offensive line currently when they didn't have Jonah Jackson, for example, this past week. At left guard, it wasn't Logan Stenberg. It would be KO'd who would really get the first look, and then Darren Paulo would mix in. They also recently signed Bobby Hart, who is a former offensive guard out of Florida State, another big body, 6'4", 330 pounds. Athletically speaking, I think he's much better suited for a guard position. They signed him, brought him in, had him taking snaps at right guard in practice this week. Colby Sorstow was a draft pick this year who was also taking snaps at right guard. Of course, you have Big V on top of all that. And then at center, they have, of course, Frank Ragnow, Graham Glasgow, who's been getting some guard look when we've had, injuries and things like that. And then Brad Cecil as well, Ross Pierschbaker. So when you look at it, like in terms of the depth within the interior offensive line, there just was kind of not much of a role here for Logan Stenberg, and we just did not see him a ton. I never really saw him progress into getting more snaps with the Lions. If anything, I don't even know if I saw him in last practice. Thought it was maybe a little bit telling last year where there were times when we were really struggling at the guard position, and the Lions, they went to Stenberg. He had 228 snaps all at the right guard position because, of course, some of the injuries that we were dealing with. We didn't have Big V for the entirety of the season, and then Evan Brown had some injuries that he was dealing with as well. So he did play some snaps. Now, if you looked at his PFF grades, they're not necessarily inspiring. A 15 pass protection grade is pretty bad. 12 pressures in just 228 snaps, which is obviously not a great percentage. The run grade was much better at a 57.2, but I think was a little bit telling was that there were times where we kind of needed a guy to step in at guard, and at a point there, we weren't even going to Logan Stenberg, and he was a guy that was like, hey, man, he's under the rookie deal. He's under contract next season. A lot of these other guys aren't. He's been here for multiple years now, and the Lions weren't even going that direction. So I thought it was a little bit telling at times last season that this was something that could be on the horizon. And then again, you kind of saw it in training camp this year. So still a young player. He's only, I believe, 26 years old. So wishing the best. Maybe he's able to land somewhere, get on his feet, and find a spot that fits him and potentially get a new fresh start and an opportunity. But here it just never really seemed to be going anywhere, especially recently in these last couple of years. Also wanted to update some of yesterday's moves that were announced. I mean, we talked about this a little bit in our live stream, but just to give a little bit more detail detail on this. Again, it's not a full breakdown, but it is just a little more detail. I have watched these guys a little bit now, so I have a little bit of a sense on these players. First off, it was announced that the Detroit Lions were waiving wide receiver Avery Davis, who wasn't there very long. He was one of their receiver pickups during training camp, and the day before in the one-on-one wide receiver DB drills, you didn't see him have much success. One of the interceptions was on him, and the cornerback was running the route for him, and then he just didn't see a lot of production really in team drills. So that one also was kind of understandable because there wasn't a lot of flashes necessarily in training camp there. And of course, we know some of these young guys have been playing well, and even the guys that aren't getting as much attention, whether that's a Chase Cota, who's a big, long, receiver. Even when he's been, throwing the football, he's shown some production. Denzel Mims coming back, right? You hope to see a player like that in the preseason because that's going to be huge for him. Again, this one just was kind of understandable. But then you have your Maurice Alexanders, who has really done well. I mean, again, not getting a lot of attention. Guys like Dylan Drummond, rightfully so, have been getting that. But Maurice Alexander has played well. And then you look at a Trinity Benson, who they think it's promising that maybe he'll be back, maybe sometime next week. So, again, that one was kind of understandable. All right, now I'm going to give a little update on some of the news that we had yesterday, but the running back position has had a lot of changes really over to the last, 24, 48 hours seemingly for the Lions here, and we're going to see some new names in preseason. We're going to see if some of these young guys can prove themselves and potentially earn a roster spot in the preseason. We've seen it before with essentially Craig Reynolds, Netflix. We're here with some news today that I definitely was not expecting that kind of has shaken this all up, and that is that Justin Jackson was placed on the retired reserve list for the Detroit Lions, essentially meaning that he is retiring from the NFL at the age of 27. Now, I don't know the reason behind this or why he's deciding to do this. Maybe we'll get a little more insight of that a little bit later on. And of course, maybe at some point he decides to come back. But all I can say is that this is going to be a tough position for the Lions to replace at this point in time. Now, again, we've seen before. We've seen guys rise to the occasion, specifically at this position, and earn themselves a role with the Lions eventually. And now it looks like they're going to be searching for potentially another guy to do that. And then you also think about the injury. Missing practice. Craig Reynolds for the last couple of days. You look at Justin Jackson, which now we may know is because of this. And then on top of that, Jermar Jefferson, who got injured in the last practice. So then you have to kind of circle that as well. And you're saying, man, there's a lot of opportunity here. But the question is going to come down to, number one, how many running backs do they want to keep, right? If Craig Reynolds gets back out there, I feel pretty comfortable. He felt pretty clearly as running back 3. But the question is, does he get back out there? And does he do that again? And then if the Lions want to go with another running back, and Justin Jackson really felt like the perfect backup to the skill set of a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, not because he was the athlete at all that Jahmyr Gibbs was, but because he was reliable seemingly in all 3 phases. And you include special teams. You talk about a very good kick returner for the Lions, which now it looks like we're going to have to try to figure out who's that guy for the Lions heading into this year. Then on top of that, you talk about the receiving game. Not an elite receiving back, but a reliable receiving back, tied with instincts, toughness. So this is going to be something that's not seemingly going to be easy for the Lions to replace. Although yesterday, and maybe this move yesterday had something to do with this, I thought originally it was because of guys missing time, Justin Jackson, but now we know this is the reason. And then also Craig Reynolds, and I thought that's why they made this move. But then you pile on top of that Jermar Jefferson's injured in last practice, and I don't know how serious it is. We'll keep an eye on that. Mohamed Ibrahim had his best practice, I think, a little bit more of an opportunity towards the end there yesterday and started to really show himself a little bit. So it seems like it's going to be a fun competition to watch here starting tomorrow in the preseason. But let's talk a little bit more about these 2 new running back additions. One was announced today. The other one was announced yesterday. And we kind of touched on it in the live stream, but I want to give a little bit more insight on what I kind of have seen from this running back. Not to say that I'm doing complete breakdowns here because I'm not, but I've watched him a little bit just to get some background and maybe some things to expect. And here's what I took away from watching just a little bit of these players. And we'll start with Devine Ozigbo. I apologize if I'm saying his name wrong, but this is the undrafted free agent that was announced yesterday, a signing from Nebraska. This is a much bigger type of running back. He kind of fits, I thought, a little bit into the Craig Reynolds type of mold in just terms of build. You're talking about a guy that's listed about 5'11", 222. You look at his frame when you watch him and kind of, maybe a little bit of his style, but the upper body and the lower body, just kind of the way that he's built really well. And then when you watch him, he's got a kind of unique rushing style. You're talking about a former track star in high school that when he has the opportunity, when he has an open lane, can kind of open it up and really take off for big opportunities when it presents itself. But then you watch him, he almost kind of gives me vibes of a Godwin Igwebuike in some of the running style. He feels like he's a little bit of an upright type of runner with longer strides. However, you'll see in the contact, the ability to drop his weight, drive forward, finish strongly. Then also some of the quick feet between the tackles to really hug up on blocks and at the same time kind of avoid some of those ankle reaches by defenders. You see kind of a one-speed rusher. I didn't see a ton of nuance, change of pace as a running back. On top of that, I thought laterally moving, he was a little bit tight. Some of his cuts took extra steps because of that. Saw him do a lot of lead work, meaning following his fullback through zone running plays. And I don't think you want to ask him to do a ton of cuts, but if you can almost make it one cut, get upfield, and they're not super steep, outside zones, potentially inside zones, those kind of things, you saw some success to see the pass game impact, and this is obviously going to be key, not because he's been a huge receiving production target either at Nebraska or in the NFL, but in the NFL where he hasn't had much rushing production. You're talking about 14 carries, 29 yards, and 0 touchdowns. He has had some receiving production, 14 receptions on 16 targets for 75 yards. And back at college, his final year where he went over 1,000 yards, 7 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns, he didn't light up the receiving side of things. You're talking 23 receptions, 203 yards, but he's had some production there, and he's also aligned at different positions. And when you saw him, I thought you saw some real ball skills and some of the ability to catch passes outside of his frame. That's going to be important. And you tie that with the fact that he shows really nice fundamentals, I think, as a pass protector. Some awareness. You see it on the play action play here against the Colts. And on top of that, really just kind of the wide base, the ability to stay balanced, keep a wide frame, and just move with pass rushers. So, those kind of reliable aspects are going to be key for, I think, if someone's going to have an opportunity to step in this role. But of course, they're going to have to flash. And he seems to have some of that open it up type of speed, and also the way that he finishes runs.
You'll be looking for some of that downhill finishing ability. I didn't see a lot of make you miss. And also, what does his pass catching look like? I mean, is it reliable? Is it soft? What are his hands like?
Today it was announced that the Lions signed another running back. And now this is a guy that may be a little bit more well known. He's a former 4th round pick out of Kentucky, weirdly enough, like Logan Stenberg. But this is Benny Snell, the running back, who has spent his last 4 years with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last couple years, he's really just became a backup to Najee Harris, but they've also had, other running backs in there as well. So he's not like it's been the number 2, like a lot of times the number 3, things like that. He hasn't had a ton of production either. You look at his career, 275 carries for 982 yards, 3.6 yards a carry, though this past season was much more efficient. And in the receiving game, there hasn't been much production at all. His career totals, 4 seasons, 17 receptions, 114 yards. That's it. And he's also had 3 fumbles, so that's something to keep an eye on as well.
The little route running I didn't see a ton of man coverage beating ability there, which is understandable. But a play like this is something that really stood out to me and something I did like. Just making the play. You think of Kentucky backs, you think of toughness and things like this.
20 carries, 90 yards, which is a better average, and 2 receptions on 2 targets. But the thing there is that that's just not a lot of sample size. A lot of it was like one game he'd play. We've seen that a couple seasons down the road. One game he'd play, another game he'd play a few snaps to kind of mix in 25, 30%. Then outside of that, he just wouldn't really play very much. On a freakish athlete, a 4.66 40, 1.55 10-yard split, and a 5'10", 225-pound frame, very similar to Ozigbo in terms of just the way that he's built there. And then on top of that, you look at some of the explosives, maybe 29.5-inch vertical, that's not outstanding. 707 3-cone drill, 16 bench rest reps is maybe the thing that pops the most. But I think you do start to like some of the, some of the qualities of a runner. I talked about the toughness that Justin Jackson had. This guy has that. You see the way that he steps in to take on pass protection. Now, his technique from the little that I watched didn't seem to be as sound, kind of using that post foot as they talked about in some of the draft video there, some of the wide base, being a little bit tall, things kind of like that. Didn't seem to be as technically sound, but I didn't really question at all ever the toughness, where when you look at his running style and also the way that he picked up in pass protection, was a big-time touchdown threat back in Kentucky. I mean, he just took basically all the touchdowns from everybody. He's been effective there, and a little bit in the NFL, he's shown some effectiveness as well doing that. Similarly to Ozigbo, he lacks that twitch laterally. What I did like here is I thought, again, for the little that I watched here, I thought you liked some of the vision in terms of, the really proactive zone angles. A lot of zone work again with Pittsburgh here, very proactive into it. You'd see him start to kind of lean into where he wanted to go. Now, again, some of that I think could be a little bit of the lack of twitch in the jump cuts. When you see him jump cut, they're not very, explosive, but they kind of work close to the line of scrimmage or close to the end zone, those kind of things. But you saw proactiveness and you saw the instincts as a runner, very proactive to, okay, I want to get here. I want to get my angles here as a zone runner, setting up things very early. Also, same thing getting into the second level. You saw kind of the same kind of idea there as well. Just really sensing where's the penetration coming from the defensive line. Where am I feeling that from and bouncing off of that. But you lack some of that explosiveness. You'll see it when he gets, through the line of scrimmage. There's not a lot of explosiveness working into the second level. It's below average in my opinion. Doesn't have like the slither. I think Ozigbo showed some slither between the tackles. I didn't see as much of that here. I thought it was a little bit more wide speed. You weren't getting tight, through those kind of zone cracks, which we've seen in training camp has been crucial. Yesterday it looked a lot better. Day before it did not look as well. We had things happening behind the line of scrimmage because you got to be able to pick through some of those tight, little windows, things like that. So like the vision side, maybe that as much as the flexibility side from a guy like Benny Snell. And on top of that, he doesn't have like some of that long home run speed either. He did show an adequate ability though at times to get the corner, and I thought a lot of it was just based on, okay, I sense that I can get here. This makes sense for me. That kind of thing. It was really just proper decision making rather than some of the speed that he was able to showcase. One of my favorite parts though about him was really the contact balance, in the sense that he had really good balance in the contact. You saw some of the stiff arm, a lot of power, breaking the first tackle consistently. You saw some of the spin move that he would place. He comes to balance really well, getting through contact, working through contact, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, again, this is another guy that's going to come down to me to reliability.
Now, neither of these players have been really effective kick returners or played much of that role at really the college or the NFL level. We've seen a little bit from Benny Snell, but neither for either of these guys, so it seems like it'd be someone else, but maybe some other special teams role.
A bit of a surprise for me today. I hate it because I'm a big fan of Justin Jackson, but I'm really just wishing the best for him. Hopefully, everything's okay off the field, those kind of things, and he's not going through anything like that. But anyways, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll get some more news on that, or by the time you're seeing this, you may know what's going on with it. Now, we have a couple final updates to hit on. First off, Teddy Bridgewater reported that he would make a maximum $5 million on a one-year deal with $2.5 million guaranteed. But that's a maximum, so that doesn't mean necessarily that he's going to get that. We didn't get the full contract details, but I was just looking through other quarterback contracts to kind of get a perspective just from looking at different guys. You have a guy like Colt McCoy. His cap hit this year is $5 million. Again, they said maximum $5 million. We're talking cap hits. What does it count against the roster? I guess this isn't super important outside of the fact of what is going to be rolled over next year. Did the Lions throw a void year on his deal to lower his cap number? I doubt it, because it's not necessary. They don't necessarily need to do that because they have cap space. So that kind of thing. But how much can be rolled over is really the biggest impact here from this year into next year, the way that I look at it. But then you also continue to look at some of these other guys. Stidham, $3 million cap hit. You look at Mike White, $2.7 million cap hit. Tyler Huntley, $2.62 million cap hit this season. Then you look at some of the guaranteed dollars. So $2.5 million, it's not a ton guaranteed, but it's only 1 year, so it's a little bit different than, say, for a guy like Andy Dalton, who's looking at $8 million guaranteed, but he's got a 2-year contract. So it's a little bit different there. Colt McCoy, $3.5 million guaranteed for just this season. Going to have to play this year because of the whole Kyler Murray injury that he's recovering from. You could also look at a guy like Cooper Rush, $2.75 million. Compare that to our guy, 2.5 here. Drew Lock, $1.75 million, to put it in perspective. Sam Darnold, he's a guy that's looking at $3.5 million guaranteed on a $4.5 million salary. So again, I think it's kind of falls into the market pretty well. We don't really need to be worried about our cap space currently, unless there's another thing on the horizon. We don't really need to worry too much about that. But it's more so to me just what's going to be rolled over. But I know some people are asking how much he was getting paid, that kind of thing. So that's kind of an idea, but we'll know more in the future. And then finally, Barry Sanders is getting a statue. The statue will be unveiled the day before the Seattle game, which is our home opener this season. Now, it's going to be non-public, of course, because Barry Sanders, he doesn't want to make it a huge deal, but it's going to be non-public. But yes, they said in front of Gate B, there's going to be a Barry Sanders statue. So at the Seattle game, you should be able to see it. That's going to be awesome. And on top of that, they also had to put out there that, it's been 30 years since we've won the division. So maybe that's like an anniversary thing. Like, hey, 30 years later, we got it done. The statue with good luck. I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things where you touch the statue every time you walk in. I guess not, because not everybody's going to the same gate. I don't know. Maybe someone starts that. Maybe some person specifically needs to touch that dang statue before maybe they won't let you touch it. They may not let you touch it. I don't know. But congratulations. It's obviously well-deserved that he's getting a statue, and that's going to be pretty awesome. I want to see what that thing looks like. But that's the news that we have today. I'm going to leave it right there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prime, for watching, and I'm out.